Hello, everyone. Now that you've had a chance to go through the labs and you've had a chance to try some different things with drafting, why not make this for real? Why not actually make yourself a real part based on what you've drafted? 3D printing is an incredible tool, and it is not underrated. There's so many amazing things you can do with 3D printing. Now, I don't claim to be a 3D printing expert. I do have a 3D printer in my shop. I do use it fairly regularly, but again, I don't claim to be a 3D printer expert. And this video may not be 100% helpful to you if you have a different 3D printer than the one that I have. That being said, I just want to go briefly over the basics on how to export a file and how to print it in 3D printing. I'm just going to run through the basics. It'll only be a couple minutes, so bear with me here. So when you have something that you've drafted, let's say this part that you should have done earlier, and you want to 3D print it. What you're going to do is you're going to click the export button. And what happens is that you're going to click export, and it's going to give you some options. Very often, it's going to give you the option to download it as an OBJ file or an STL file. It all depends on what 3D printer you use and what settings your printer prefers. But very often, I see people using STL files, and I'm going to use an STL file myself. So what you do is you click export, and you download it to an STL. What then ends up happening is you're going to open it up in a 3D printing software, and the 3D printing software that you use depends on the type of printer that you have. What I'm about to show you is based on the idea that we're going to be using a original Prusa MK4. That's my printer of choice, but I don't endorse it by any means. There's other printers out there that are just as good. So I'm going to show you a couple screenshots I took of me doing this on the original Prusa MK4. So again, you have your downloaded file, your STL file. And what ends up happening is that you're going to go to a software that's called a slicer. A slicer is a really cool software where essentially you're going to open up your CAD file, and it's going to open up, and it's actually going to put it for you in the format that you can actually 3D print it in. You're going to notice over here there's lots of print settings. There's you can adjust the speed. You can adjust what kind of filament you're using. Filament, in case you don't know, is essentially the material that you're printing with. Very often, people use a kind of film that's called PLA. It's essentially plastic. You're 3D printing plastic. And what ends up happening is that when you're 3D printing, and I'll show you in this image right here, this nozzle right here is extruding out plastic that is melting and being created into a part. And this nozzle essentially is guided through code that tells it exactly where to go in a manner that's very similar to a CNC machine. So again, back to the main point here, what's going to happen is that you're going to adjust your settings, and then you're going to see in every software it's a little different, but the idea is that once you've set up your thing and made it ready for print, you're going to export G-code. G-code is the code that tells the printer where to print, how much to print, and all of that stuff. So you export the G-code, and then what happens is that you're going to put the G-code onto a flash drive, and that flash drive is going to give the information that you need to run the part and to begin printing it. And ultimately, when you run through that process, you're going to get a nice looking part just like this. So again, everyone's process is slightly different, but it essentially comprises of a few steps. You're going to export to either an STL file or OBJ file or whatever's compatible to your printer. You're going to go over to your slicer, make sure your settings are good. You have infill, structural infill, which is this stuff right here. You know, the cross-hatching that you see right here, that's structural infill. You're going to make sure that your settings are right, that you have the right amount of support structure, that you have the right amount of everything. Once you do that, you go ahead, you export the G-code, and once you export the G-code, then you put it on the printer, on the thumb drive, and press print, and it's going to print. So That's the basics of 3D printing. I hope this is helpful. Clancy over and out.